Good morning, everyone. My name is Nick Kawada. I am the Policy Director for Silicon Valley Council of Nonprofits. And got a really great presentation for you today. But just to kind of start, we have, it's been a difficult time. There's been a lot going on in terms of the different health orders that are kind of flying around from the state, the county, heck, even the city has been changing certain requirements in terms of when you can go into an indoor space or how many people you can have in that space. So part of those health orders have been around employers and asking employers, urging employers to also require vaccinations or at least consider it. And, at SVCN, we were kind of considering the same sort of feat for ourselves. And we kept running into like 1,000,001 problems. How does this work? We don't know about this. We don't know about that. So we actually ended up thinking, this might be a good opportunity for all of us to come together and learn. So we're gonna talk a little bit about Sarju and what he can help us kind of figure out today. But I do want to remind you about a few things. First and foremost, remember chat feature. We're going to be using that for our question and answer section. So please put your questions in there. There was a question request in the Reg Fox page, and we got those questions. So we will be asking a few of them to Sarju, and we unfortunately can't ask every question. We only have so much time. I also do want to mention that there is a caption feature at the bottom section of your toolbar there. Just click on that live transcript, and it should be able to, be at least have some captions there. I believe that is only available in English, however. Please, when not speaking, please remain on mute, just so we can hear the presentation clearly, hear the speakers clearly, etc. Just another reminder, we will be having this recording available on our YouTube channel at some time afterwards. And then, of course, pushing that through our newsletter. So if you haven't subscribed to our newsletter, please do that as well. If you have just arrived and you haven't done so already, please put your name, preferred pronouns, role, and organization into the chat so we know who's here just to say hi. And again, welcome. We hope to hopefully give some good insight. Now, I have lost the ability to share the poll that we were going to put. So Dana, do we have that available to push to some folks, or anyone on the SVCN team, I should say?
Trying to figure out who has it. Might be Milani.
We're playing hot potato right now with the poll, but we will be pushing that in a moment. And it's just to ask generally, what where folks are at in terms of the conversation. I do also want to bring up a few things as well in terms of the timing. We will be having the general discussion with Sarju's presentation and then following up with Q&A. So, if you do have questions, don't worry, we will get around to them. We just need a little bit of time. Anyway, I do want to introduce our key speaker today. So Sarju Naran, he is our zealous advocate for his clients and for our nonprofits, obviously, and approaches litigation with creativity and strategy. He is the chair of the Employment Law Group, and Sarju's experience spans from representing middle market and family-owned, closely held businesses to large multinational companies. He regularly litigates and provides advice and counsel to companies on wage and hour issues, trade secret misappropriation, employee mobility, wrongful termination, performance management, leaves of absence, other high-risk matters, and he appreciates that litigation can be an unwelcome distraction to business operations and often comes at high financial and intangible costs. As such, Sarju is committed to representing his clients with an eye towards prevention, compliance, mitigation, and efficiency. Sarju, thank you so much for being here today, and welcome.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot for having me.
So I think we're gonna kind of talk a little bit about if you want to kind of give some opening remarks and maybe a high-level overview of the situation, Sarju.
Sure.
What's kind of going on?
Yeah. So the big question I'm getting these days, of course, is can employers mandate the vaccine? And I get it. We're, especially here in California, it's a very employee-friendly state. We're not used to being able to ask employees to do anything they don't want to do, right? Normally that sounds like that's a no-no. We've got considerations like privacy, medical exams that you're not allowed to conduct, that sort of thing. But we are dealing with a public health crisis of a global scale. And so the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has made it very clear that even under the ADA rules relating to disabilities, of the Americans with Disabilities Act and whatnot, you can require vaccination. It is not a violation of privacy. But to be very clear, the reason that we're able to do it is because we're not actually forcing anybody to get a vaccine. What we're saying is it's a condition of your employment. And that's a key distinction because up until at least a couple days ago, we only had emergency use authorization from the FDA. We now do have full FDA approval for the Pfizer vaccine, which is excellent. But before that, a lot of folks were saying, well, how can you make me get a vaccine when it's not even federally approved by the FDA? It's only under emergency use authorization. And emergency use authorization comes with the caveat that you have to tell individuals what all the risks are associated with getting a vaccine and afford the individual the right to say no. So employers requiring vaccination is completely at odds with that, isn't it? Well, there's only one court that's weighed in on this so far, but it's consistent with what the EEOC is saying, which is that we're not requiring you to get the vaccine. We're just requiring it as a condition of employment, which is it seems like we're splitting hairs there, but basically what we're saying is you can choose not to be vaccinated, but by doing so, you're choosing not to hold this job. So you can certainly do that. And I know, this is more of a practical issue for a lot of employers, and I certainly appreciate it. This isn't a tough time to be operating a business of any variety, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit. People aren't out there to pick up empty positions. So when you have employees that say, all right, well, you're giving me an ultimatum, I'm not interested, I'm going to go somewhere else. Well, that's a tough position for organizations, right? All right, so by me requiring that you be vaccinated, that means that I'm now going to lose you as an employee. Am I okay with that? Or am I going to create an exception? So that's essentially, that's the land that we're living in right now. And then I'll get into exemptions in just a second. Why don't we go to the next slide? I'm going to change my view to gallery because I want to see everybody. Okay, so here we do have some health orders. It's interesting because by and large, the government is leaving it to the private sector to figure this out. And so I'm sure you guys have seen over the last several weeks, especially as the Delta variant has taken hold and become the prevalent strain, that we're seeing Santa Clara County and other Bay Area counties saying, we recommend that you encourage people to get the vaccine. And then it was, we encourage you to require that they get the vaccine. And if they don't, then we encourage you to get employees tested weekly. Well, it's interesting, right? I mean, this is the government saying, we're not going to tell you what to do, but we would really like for you to do it. So what I'm seeing is that there's not really the political will at either the local level, the state level, or the federal level to require that this happen. And so you've got a patchwork. It's really up to individual organizations to figure it out and decide whether this is something that they want to do or not. But there are some mandates that have been instituted by the state of California, as well as some of our local counties and cities. So I've got links here for two of the healthcare mandates that have come from the California Public Health Department. The first one pertains to healthcare workers. Second one pertains to school workers. There is a third one that also pertains to healthcare workers, and it came out July 26th. So, but just in short, and because I don't know how many people this is actually relevant to on this particular call, so I don't want to spend too much time talking about the vaccine mandate as it relates to these two specific industries. But for healthcare workers and for school workers, the state is saying you have to be vaccinated. So what that means for right now for healthcare workers is that from July 26th onward, if you're not vaccinated, you need to get tested weekly. If you're in a particularly acute environment, you got to get tested twice weekly. And that's a requirement by the state of California for all healthcare workers. We'll get into the exemptions in a minute, but that's the general rule. And then what you have from the August 5th order, which is what we have the link for here, it's saying that by September 30th, all healthcare workers need to be vaccinated. And then similarly, you have one for school workers. So we're talking about not just teachers, but those who work in any sort of school environment. And that one, the more recent one, and it's along the same lines, requiring vaccination for school workers, and give them a deadline to do so. So that's at the statewide level. I'm sure many of you already know that Santa Clara and San Jose have done the same thing for their own employees. So Santa Clara employees, San Jose employees that work for the county of Santa Clara or the city of San Jose are required to be vaccinated or get tested. And then what we do have now in the Bay Area, throughout the Bay Area, so you'll see here, I've included the links for Santa Clara County and San Mateo County, because my understanding is that's where the majority of the folks on this call operate. But there are similar orders for Contra Costa, Marin, San Francisco, Sonoma, as well as the city of Berkeley. And those orders require mandatory mask or face coverings when you're indoors. So regardless of vaccination status, and this is again all in effort to try to curb the spread of the virus. But as we're seeing at the local level, at least, and broadly without regard for industry, as far as the counties and cities are willing to go, is to say you must wear a mask. They're not willing to say you must get vaccinated. So it really does put the issue back into the hands of the employer, unless you do fall within the healthcare industry or the school worker industry. All right, let's go to the next slide. So this is really where I've been spending a lot of my time with clients over the past couple of weeks, and I've really seen it ramp up in the number of questions that we're getting along these lines, because whether it's the state order for healthcare workers or school workers, or it's employers that are deciding on their own that we want to require vaccination for all of our employees. We think it's the right thing to do. We want to curb the spread. There's a lot of companies that began doing this a couple months ago, but I'm seeing it really ramp up. And I think that that'll continue to happen now that we've got FDA approval for the Pfizer vaccine. So there are a couple of exceptions under the state orders, as well as if employers are requiring vaccination of employees. And that's that, just like with any other sort of disability or medical related issue, there needs to be accommodation for folks that have a medical condition that prevents them from being able to be vaccinated. And similarly, we have to consider accommodation for folks that hold a sincerely held religious belief, observance, or practice. So, of course, that's the question. Well, what qualifies? And how do I know that someone's being sincere? How do I know that this truly is based on religion? And so those are the majority of the issues that we're dealing with, because employers are dealing with claims of exemption by folks that they know have been anti-vax for quite a while. And it's hard to know, are they being sincere in their belief or not? So there are certain questions, and I'll get into this a little bit now, but I'll save some of it as well, because I know that folks have specific questions. With respect to medical condition, it's the process is pretty easy. I mean, it's just like it is for any other disability in the workplace. If the employee says, I can't be vaccinated due to a medical condition, all right, well, provide me with a healthcare certification. Get me something from your doctor. And that's really about it. You may not agree with it, but chances are you're going to have to accommodate in that situation. Now, the one thing that employers often don't take advantage of, but is available to them, is that, if you get a note from a doctor and you say, I think you just went to a doctor and asked them to write something up, they did what you asked them to do, but I don't believe it's legitimate. You do have the ability to have that employee go see a second doctor of your choosing on your time and on your dime, right? So you say, well, go see, I want you to go get a second opinion. So you're allowed to do that. Most employers don't do that because it just reflects a lot of distrust in the employee and in the relationship, and often it creates tension, and so employers just don't want to bother. But that is something that's available to you if you feel like you're being presented with false information or information that a doctor simply signed off on without it actually being accurate. With religion, it's a lot trickier, because as the EEOC has indicated in its pretty substantial guidance on this issue, religion is subjective. Religious beliefs are subjective. Obviously, there's a lot of major religions and those that are recognized, but then there's those that are lesser known. And even within the more recognized religions, while it's an objectively accurate statement to say that most religions of the world, if not all of them, well, it's not going to be all, but close to all of them, support vaccination by and large. But that doesn't mean that every person who belongs to that religion has a religious belief that supports that, right? So you can belong to a religion, you can be a Catholic, and the Pope has gotten vaccinated. The fact that the Pope has gotten vaccinated doesn't mean that you don't have a legitimate claim of religious exemption based on a sincerely held belief. So really all it requires, it is rather subjective, and it doesn't have to be logical, doesn't have to be consistent with what others in the same religion believe, as long as it's sincerely held. And so how do you figure that out? This is all information that resides in somebody's head. That's it. Are you being sincere in your belief, and is it based in religion? So if somebody says to you, it's against my religious beliefs to get vaccinated, all right, so the presumption is that they're being sincere and that it is based on religion. You typically at that point should just go ahead and move on to the next step of accommodating them. But you can ask certain questions. You are permitted to kick the tires a little bit and hold them accountable and not just accept that they said it, so therefore it is. The types of questions that you can ask, a couple different forms of questions. One, is there any religious leader that would be able to provide you with a letter of support? Is there anybody else within your religious belief system that can provide a letter of support? Right? If it's not a religious leader, then could it be somebody else, a family member, a neighbor, a friend, somebody who can attest to the fact that they've observed you, observe these practices or discuss these practices or not have knowledge of this being your religious belief. That's pretty much it by way of documents. Otherwise, it's asking information. All right, well, tell me what your religious belief is. You don't have to ask them what religion they belong to, and you probably shouldn't, because that's, there's a fine line here in how far you can go and how invasive you can be. You're not entitled to know what the religion is, but you can ask them, well, what's your religious belief? Can you point me to any religious tenets that support your belief? Is there anything in writing? I mean, if you're citing to a biblical passage or whatever it may be, so something you can point to that shows me that this is a reflection of your religious belief. In what other ways have you observed your religious belief? Can you give me other examples? You're saying that you can't get vaccinated. Is that any vaccine? Is it specific to this vaccine? What is it about this vaccine? If you've gotten the flu shot, for instance, what is it about this vaccine that violates your religious beliefs? When did you first embrace your religious belief? These are all questions that employees are going to have some response to, and I will tell you now that most responses are going to be acceptable, and it's going to require you to recognize the exemption, right? Very rarely are you going to have an employee that basically says, all right, you got me. It's not really based on religion, or it's not really sincere. I really just don't want to get the vax. But some people will say things like that. I had one recently where the person said, look, my religion requires me to follow my personal morals, and my personal belief is that this vaccine was rushed to market. It's just not safe. Okay, well, that's actually not founded in religion. What they're saying is that religion is their guiding principle in everything they do, but there's nothing in their religion that says don't get this vaccination. They're just saying they're being guided by God to make this decision. So there's a fine line there, and that wouldn't qualify, because what they're saying is I just don't believe in it. I don't like the way it was manufactured. I think it was too quick. I'm not sure if it's safe. That's really just hesitancy and based on personal concern. The fact that they throw in the word religion in there doesn't turn into a religious exemption. So once you ask those questions and you've cleared that hurdle, and you are going to, in all likelihood, give the employee the benefit of the doubt that they do have a sincerely held religious belief that exempts them. Then the question is, for both medical condition as well as for a religious belief, can you accommodate them, right? So you've got an exemption that on its face would entitle you to some accommodation. That's what that means. It doesn't mean you're exempt from vaccination. It means you're entitled to an accommodation if the accommodation is reasonable and doesn't impose an undue hardship on the organization. And so that's the next big issue that I've been dealing with a lot with clients, because every client wants to say, yeah, it's unreasonable. It imposes an undue hardship. But you have to ask, well, why do you say that? What is it about accommodating this person that creates an undue hardship? Well, it's a dangerous virus, and they're putting people at risk. Well, the problem is, everybody is putting everybody at risk right now, whether you're vaccinated or not, and that's just the reality. And many organizations have had their employees working in person, not remotely, since pretty much the beginning of the pandemic. Are they at any greater risk now than they have been? If you were able to accommodate them before, what's magically happened now that you can't accommodate them going forward? And the science doesn't support that you must be vaccinated. What the CDC has said, they're not saying we're back in lockdown mode. The state of California isn't saying we're back in lockdown mode. What they're saying is, we encourage you to get vaccinated and we require that you wear masks. So as long as you're wearing a mask, the science supports that you're safe enough. Obviously, we're not fully safe. We all know that because the virus is still spreading. A lot of that's based on non-compliance, but nevertheless, if the government and the science behind the virus is saying you can still show up to work, just wear a mask. Well, it's difficult for an employer to say, well, no, that would be unreasonable and impose an undue hardship. So the point there is to say that, the whole practice of getting into a discussion with the employee about their religious belief and the sincerity of it, it's something that employers can do if they feel like they need to do something in order to try to curb abuse and hold employees accountable. But ultimately, chances are you're going to end up in the same place. And once you've resolved that they do have a medical condition or they do have a religious belief, or at least one that facially looks like it's going to pass muster, you're going to have to accommodate them. And so the way that folks are doing that is similar to what the state's doing with these state health orders for healthcare workers and school workers, is saying, all right, if you're not vaccinated, well, then two things. You need to wear a mask. We can require an N95 mask, whatever PPE you want. You're going to have to provide it to the employee. And number two, you can require testing. Typically, that's going to be testing once a week. For certain positions, you can do it twice a week. And frankly, for private employers, you may require it twice a week and it still be considered reasonable. I wouldn't do it willy-nilly if you really don't think that it's necessary for the position that somebody holds. If you're in an office environment, for instance, I think twice a week is pretty onerous. Also keep in mind that employers have to pay for the testing. They got to pay for the test. And I don't know if they're going to be able to obtain free testing at this point. Maybe there are facilities that provide free testing. It's something that you would want to take a look at. You're also going to have to provide compensation for the time that the employee takes to go get tested. If we're talking about hourly non-exempt employees, if you've got folks that don't qualify for an exemption from overtime based on their compensation and their duties, well then they're on the clock. So when you send them to go get testing, you got to pay them for that. So for that reason also, you may not want to get them tested more often than you have to. But it's one more thing that you can do in the interest of ensuring that you're keeping as many people safe as possible while still accommodating folks who don't want to get vaccinated. So I've been going for quite a while. Hopefully that's a helpful overview. And with that, Nick, I think we can turn to some questions if you'd like.
That'd be great. And thank you, Sarju. I think, a lot of the things that you're talking about are contain the questions that we received. And I should have said this at the beginning. It was on the registration page, just to be very clear that we really appreciate having Sarju here, but please don't get confused. He's not going to be representing you under these circumstances. You will have to speak to him directly for a different term of employment as an attorney if you do seek particular legal advice. And that, everything that we're kind of telling you here today is more on the general level. So please don't be confused. This is not to be construed as legal advice. Now, I did get good news. We do have our poll. So Dan, if you wouldn't mind launching our poll as we kind of go through some of these questions, that would be great. And Sarju, apologies. We're going to be asking some of the questions that you've kind of gone over some of these already. But just to be very clear, may an employer terminate an employee for not vaccinating? Just be very clear about that. Yes. And again, I know that it makes people very uncomfortable. Like, how can that be possible? But it's a condition of employment. And what I would compare it to is, the fact that this is something else that's near and dear to people in many organizations. If you require that the person come into work in person, forget pandemic circumstances, pre-COVID. You said your job is here. The person says, well, but I live in Modesto. I'm just going to work remotely. Well, no, I'm sorry. Your job is here, and it's a condition of your employment that you be here. They say, well, I don't want to come in. Okay, well, then you're choosing not to be employed here. This is exactly the same thing.
right? So forget about pandemic circumstances and people not wanting to come in because they don't feel it's safe. If there's a condition of employment, you may say, hey, you're going to have to travel occasionally out of the area, which means getting on a plane or being out of town for a week, a month. I mean, are you going to be able to do that? Well, I've got family obligations and whatnot. Understand, but that is a requirement for the job. Can you do it? No. Okay, well, you don't have the job. That's basically the way this works, right? Are you vaccinated? No. Are you going to get vaccinated? No. Okay, well, it's a condition of the job. So if you choose not to do it, you can't be hired, or if you are a current employee, well, then we're going to have to end your employment. So that's the easy answer. Obviously, the trickier one is, are we willing to actually make that decision, knowing that once we lose that employee, we're going to have a position to fill?
Absolutely, absolutely, and we do want to be cognizant of the relationship, obviously, as well.
Right. Well, and then what I'm hearing from a lot of folks, and it's unfortunate, is that it's some of their key players, right? Some of their best employees, their longest tenured, their most skilled, the folks that they really can't afford to let go. And people are not fungible. We can't just swap one out for another. So I mean, we have to value the individual, and they've got a place in the business. So sometimes that'll dictate policy, and it's frustrating because the company wants to do one thing, but there is one employee that's far too valuable for us to lose. And if we're not going to require it of that person, well, now we do have to be consistent with others. We can't say we're going to require for everybody except for this person. Then you got an issue of inconsistency, and that's where you get claims of discrimination.
Got it. And obviously, the terms of employment for individuals are different. For instance, like volunteers or part-timers, or even like board members. Is there any sort of additional considerations for those folks?
So no, that's the short answer. Just keep in mind, you're also required to do the same thing for your vendors, your customers, your clients. You can have a rule that, look, no one is allowed to step foot on our facilities, on our premises, without being fully vaccinated. And potentially, you can also require that they provide proof of that vaccination. So the same is going to be true for anybody, regardless of their status, whether they're full-time, part-time, temporary, volunteer, independent contractor, board member, or just a member of the general public that's coming on site.
Got it. And we've been hearing the news about this new booster shot, and even for folks who are immunocompromised, they have the third shot. Is there any sort of reclassification of what it means to be fully vaccinated? Do you need to get those additional shots to be considered fully vaccinated? That's a
really good question. That remains to be seen, because right now there's a plan in place for booster shots to be available. I think once folks are 8 months out from their last vaccination. So I expect that we may end up there. That's not going to begin rolling out. I believe they said September 20th is when they're going to start making the third shot available. At that point, we'll see. My expectation is that at some point that will be required as part of the definition of fully vaccinated, because right now I know they're doing it in an abundance of caution, but I think we're going to have more science to back it up soon enough that having a vaccine that's more than 8 months old is not effective. It's not effective enough, and we really do need that booster shot to reach, full vaccination status.
Got it.
It's a good question.
Yeah,
it's a little early to know, but I think it's good to forecast that and to consider that down the road. Luckily, we're not there yet, and of course, even now, the vaccine mandates typically come with a deadline and a time frame to comply. So employers can do it whenever they want. They can say, look, within the next 2 weeks, we need you to go get your first shot, and we need you to get your last shot by this date. We're going to have to give people time to comply if it hasn't been a requirement thus far. The state of California for the healthcare workers and school workers is saying September 30th. So, yeah, I don't expect it to be required that you have to get your third shot until some point after that, because it's just too new to require people to jump on it so quickly.
Apologies. Yeah, I know. Some of this is like look into a crystal ball, right? It's a changing landscape, clearly. Right. And one of the things that we don't control is obviously people's biology. Everyone has, and this is obviously a very, very small exception of folks, but some folks do experience adverse effects. Is the employer liable for any of those adverse effects?
So no, they're not. From the vaccine, no. If if somebody contracts COVID in the workplace, well, it's going to be a workers' compensation claim if it can be demonstrated it was work related. I mean, and that's tricky, right? Well, did you contract it here? Did you contract it somewhere else? But for the vaccination, no.
Got it. Thanks. And is there, I mean, obviously privacy is key here, and I'm not just asking folks to go and share people's private information, but is there any sort of limitation on who can be, whose employee vaccination status can be disclosed to? Like, does it have to be kept completely separate and secure, or who can know? I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I would treat it the same way as any other medical information, which companies are hopefully somewhat familiar with. Generally speaking, it's only people with a need to know, and that's going to be HR, obviously, for one. But beyond HR, probably the employee's manager or supervisor. You don't need to. Probably every manager doesn't need to know, but if there's a need for a different manager to work with an employee, and this is going to be something that's going to be factored in, like, hey, this person's on a part-time schedule because of a medical condition, well, then that manager needs to know so that they don't reprimand that employee for not being available on that day, right? It's that type of thing. So as long as it's kept within the manager ranks, generally you're okay. But even there, it shouldn't be disclosed other than on a need-to-know basis. What you can't do is disclose someone's vaccine status to any rank and file employee, any non-management level employee, or to any customer. And we are seeing this as well, that there are certain clients or customers that say, what's your vaccine policy? Well, that's fine. We can tell them our vaccine policy. You have to be either fully vaccinated or fall within a legally recognized exemption. And in those instances, or if they fall within a recognized exemption, we require masking, which everybody's required to do right now anyway, and we require weekly testing, right? But if a client or a customer were to say, are all of your people vaccinated? Well, that's a tough one, because the reality may be that the answer is yes, but the answer may only be yes today. So if you say, yes, 100% of our people are vaccinated, and then tomorrow we get an applicant and we hire somebody who says, I can't based on a medical exemption or religious exemption. Well, we can't discriminate and not hire that person on that basis. So we're going to hire them. And now when the client says, so you said everybody's 100% vaccinated, right? Well, that's not true anymore. Well, it becomes obvious that that new person is the person that's the exception, right? So we basically outed them. So I would stay away from making those sorts of representations to clients or customers or to your employee population. And it's really the employee population that's going to know. Your outside folks may not know, well, who's new to the organization, because that person's the culprit. But within the organization, if we say, oh, we're 100% vaccinated, and then one day we say, never mind, we're not, they're going to think, oh, that's because we got a new person, and that's who it is. So we do have to be mindful of that. We can't disclose other people's vaccine status to other employees. Of course, every single employee is entitled to share whatever information about themselves that they want. So if you want to ask your colleague, hey, are you vaccinated? Employee can say it's none of your business. I don't disclose that. They could say yes or no. It's really up to that person whether they want to share it. It would not be unlawful for a coworker to ask another coworker, but it is a problem for any management level employee to ask that information in the presence of somebody else.
Got it. Yeah, plenty of other things to guarantee in the course of business anyway. Probably don't want to talk about that. Obviously, there are certain BIPOC groups, community groups that have had historic distrust of vaccines. Is there any sort of potential discriminatory liability for any of these groups if they do bring an action, say, our groups traditionally have not held a lot of trust in vaccination, and now we're being required to do it, and you're going to let us go if we don't get the vaccinated? Is there any sort of issue there?
Theoretically, yes. And what I'm hearing you say, you're referring to what would be considered a disparate impact type case, where let's just pick a population. Let's just say Native Americans. If they say the Native American population generally distrusts vaccines, right? I'm not trying to disparage anybody. I'm just using this as a complete hypothetical, so please forgive me. I don't want to offend anybody. I'm just using this as an example. If we have just a uniform policy and a consistent policy of no, it doesn't matter, other than you falling within a religious exemption or a medical exemption, it doesn't matter what your personal beliefs are, we require vaccination. It's at least theoretically possible that a population that traditionally doesn't believe in vaccination can say, well, your policy has a disparate impact on this particular population that I belong to my ethnicity, to this particular ethnic group. So it is theoretically possible that we might see discrimination claims along those lines. I'll be honest with you, and that's why I use this example. I'm not aware personally of any particular ethnicity or protected class that largely distrusts the vaccine. I mean, I have heard it from very different populations, but I think there's a variety of factors. But at least in theory, it's possible. It's a very sophisticated type of claim, because what you're saying is that you didn't mean to pick on this one person. You didn't say, I'm going to treat you differently because you belong to this ethnicity, but your policy has a negative impact on my ethnicity. So you do see those sorts of claims from time to time. I haven't heard of it in the context of vaccination yet. I think the bigger challenge is going to be a constitutional one, right? And again, we've already seen it come up one time, but it was with the hospital in Texas, and the court said employers are not requiring you to get vaccinated. They're just making a condition of employment. Those are two very different things. So you can choose not to be vaccinated. You're just also choosing not to have this job when you do that. I'll bring this up. It may be a little bit off, but it's related. I was talking about this with Dana right before we started. So I was reading this morning, the City Council, San Jose City Council voted last night to require proof of vaccination for any attendee of an event that has 50 or more people in any city building. So that's going to include, all the theaters downtown that are owned by San Jose, like the San Jose Performing Arts Theater. It's going to apply to SAP Center. I don't know what all the facilities are that's going to apply to, but you got a gathering of more than 50 people. The city is saying that facility needs to obtain proof, which means you're talking about that card, or you're talking about a QR code, your electronic record, in order for that person to gain entry. So I'm sure this is going to upset people, right? Because it's not just a hassle. What it means is that if you're not vaccinated, it's not just about showing your card. It's saying that if you're not vaccinated, you don't get to participate in this event. You don't get to attend this event. So I can foresee that there's going to be challenges as to that, prohibiting people from engaging in a public forum, attending public events, exercising their First Amendment rights. These are private facilities, though, although they're operated by the city. So they're definitely stretching a bit, and that's the type of thing that I can see being subject to a potential constitutional challenge. But we'll see. I mean, we all understand why the city is doing it. It's all in an effort to try to eradicate this virus, or at least bring it down to manageable levels. But that doesn't mean it's gonna come without some legal challenges.
For sure. And as we know, the health scene is changing. Clearly, we've had a pretty noticeable uptick in cases because of Delta locally. Right. I think it makes up a pretty large majority of COVID infection cases statewide now. So I can see like political bodies kind of dealing with that, and then of course the eventual consequences for making those actions. And I know you've talked at length about exceptions and seeking exemption, religious or health-wise, but if an employer denies a religious or health exemption they don't feel is legitimate, and of course intention is very important here, but if they deny it, are they liable for any sort of actions they take there?
Yeah, so what that would do is if an employer declines to recognize an exemption or declines to accommodate, they're opening themselves up to a potential claim by that individual. So that employee can then bring a discrimination case. They can bring a failure to, so it would probably be two claims that you're going to look at. One is discrimination, or either medical discrimination or religious discrimination, and failure to accommodate, both of which fall under the Fair Employment and Housing Act. And my assumption is that it's going to be a wrongful termination type case, right? So what they're saying is I lost my job because the employer refused to recognize my exemption. If the employee instead says, fine, I'll go ahead and get vaccinated, I don't know. I don't know if the employee can get vaccinated and then bring a claim and say, well, I was forced to do this. I'm guessing the answer would be no, because again, they were given the choice and they've made the choice at that point. So I wouldn't expect, I don't put it past a savvy employment attorney on the employee side to come up with some sort of potential claim, but I don't see it, because at that point, the employer really is giving the employee the choice. They may say, well, you're saying that, but I really need this job. Right, well, you've made a choice to have this job that requires this vaccine. So I think once an employee gets it, even if they suffer some adverse reactions to it, they're not going to be able to hold the employer responsible for requiring it.
Got it. And you've already touched on this, so I just want to kind of reiterate for the folks here. What is the employer's liability if we do not mandate testing for vaccinated employees, and there is a breakthrough case?
Right. So I certainly haven't looked at the OSHA emergency regulations anytime recently, so I don't have them memorized. But if you do have an outbreak, there's certain protocol you do have to follow according to the OSHA ETS, right? You've got to exclude those persons, the people that have been exposed. You got to notify them. People that came into close contact, you got to exclude them and have them quarantined. You got to pay for that time off. There's those sorts of requirements. But in terms of liability, you're following protocol. You haven't done anything that's outside of your expectations. The government is not telling you to do anything different. It would be a different situation if the government were saying you are not allowed to operate your business, which we already went through that during the lockdown, right? Certain restaurants that couldn't have indoor operations, bars were completely closed. That would be a different situation. If you were open in that environment and somebody were to get sick or there would be an outbreak, then I think you would be subject to substantial liability. But if it happens under our current context where, all right, we're not requiring vaccination, but we are following guidelines. We're being told that we need to wear masks. Okay, we're wearing masks, and somebody catches COVID, they can file a workers' compensation claim, but that's about it. And it may get picked up, it may not. That's really up to your workers' comp carrier at that point to figure out whether it's going to be an accepted claim. But that's the one nice thing about the workers' compensation system is that it's a no-fault system. It's considered whether you did something wrong or not. This is it. That's your exclusive remedy. Again, unless you've done something outside of what you're expected to do. So if you're not following standards and guidelines, and you're not following what the law tells you need to do, such as opening a facility that you're not allowed to open, or, oh yeah, we're going to have our employees here and nobody needs to be masked. We're not going to require vaccination. We're also not going to require masks. An employee in that type of environment could bring a claim and say, I'm going to bring my claim in court, not in workers' comp, because the company didn't follow regulations and the mask mandate. So as a result, they acted egregiously. It was reckless. So they should not be protected by the limitations of the workers' comp system. I should be able to sue them for much more money in court for that situation.
Oh wow. Okay, that's good to know.
I mean, this is why employers need to comply with all mandates, right? So when they say you're required to have masking, this is why you have to do it. It's not just because you might get fined by the county or the city. It's because there's also potential exposure for civil liability if an employee were to contract the virus in a non-compliant environment. Got
it. Okay. I'm gonna shift to the next section, which is live questions. So folks, if you haven't already, I know some of you have put some questions in the chat. Please that we only have a few minutes. I probably won't be able to get to all of them, but I just want to kind of start with Shelton's question here. And obviously the verification process does seem pretty onerous, pretty time consuming. Is there any way to streamline that verification process?
You're talking about with respect to exemptions?
Yeah, exemptions for religious beliefs. Yeah.
Yeah, I look, you don't have to go through it at all. If an employee says, I am claiming an exemption, you could say, okay, we'll accommodate you. Here's what you need to do. Wear a mask and get tested weekly. You can go straight there. Some employers will have an exemption claim form. Fill this out, submit it. We'll take a look at it. And that's as far as they go. They just want to keep that on record. Some will say, I want to hold the employee accountable, or I suspect they're not being truthful. So they're going to go that extra step and ask those questions and require that documentation, but you're certainly not required to do any of that. I mean, and I get it, right? I mean, it's you're sort of asking yourself, why bother if ultimately we're all going to end up at the same place? Which I'm okay with that. But of course, if you don't kick the tires at all, you may be inviting more people to claim those exemptions and abuse the system.
Got it. And this is from Jennifer. And this is with regards to, we had mentioned disclosing vaccination status of employees. So it's in that context. But doesn't the team that works closely with the unvaccinated individual have the right to know so they can keep their distance?
You would hope so, but no, it is private information. I mean, it's just, look, consider pre-pandemic when somebody comes in with a cold or a flu. If their symptoms are masked, right? They're not really showing anything, but they know, yeah, I'm not feeling well. They don't have to go around and tell everybody. And if HR knows about it, they're not at liberty. I mean, they can tell the person in that situation, go home. But here, we're not talking about people who are sick. We're just talking about people who are unvaccinated. And so, following the guidelines, everyone just needs to be masked. If you know this, and you know that that's what's happening in your workplace, is that you've got folks that are vaccinated working close with folks that are unvaccinated, figure out a way to separate them without discussing the reasons why. Say, hey, look, we're going to institute some protocols, just given our current environment with the Delta variant and whatnot. We just think it's safer to have people a little more distant, so let's create some space. But you definitely cannot share someone else's vaccination status with coworkers. Those coworkers can certainly ask each other directly, but you should not encourage them to do that. You shouldn't be telling folks, ask that person or ask each other.
Got it. Okay. And is there any guidance on employer liability if an individual test comes back inconclusive? And that does happen from time to time.
If it's inconclusive, I would ask them to go back out and get tested again, and have them be on a leave of absence until they get their test result.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Now this next question, and Shelton, I might need to have you unmute in a second here, but the question is with regards to the constitutional aspect, what is the difference between what the courts did as a result of 9/11 and the mandates for masks and vaccines? Just in terms of clarification, Shelton, are you referring to some sort of court order that happened on 9/11?
Yeah, so with respect to the 9/11, the airlines instituted a lot of different requirements because the government mandated that they need to have our date of birth, our social security, whatever information we had to give them in order to fly, right? So here's the same deal. So with the San Jose imposing the mandate for 50 and over, people that, that attend an event that is 50 and over, they're requiring that they either, be vaccinated. That's, to me, constitutionally, somebody can go back and say, well, why are you asking people who are flying to give you all this information? Because a lot of it is very, especially people of different ethnic groups that were flying, they got harassed because their last name was somehow associated with terrorism. And in fact, it wasn't. When you go into a bank and you open up an account, under the Patriot Act, you have to give them all this information. And I know people challenged that and lost. So in this case, I'm thinking the same thing, that if any employer or any employee wants to challenge this whole thing, or public, then they're going to run into, or perhaps may run into, the same situation, and say, the courts may come back and say, hey, this is what the government's requiring because it's a health risk. It affects the general public.
Yeah.
Am I right, or is that?
Yeah, well, I'm definitely not a constitutional attorney. I don't even play one on TV, but I agree with your points generally. And we are dealing with a public health crisis, and so these aren't normal circumstances. We had to have a very strong and unfamiliar response to 9/11, and we're doing the same thing here. So I don't think that it's a clear-cut issue per se, but I think that the municipalities and the local governments, they are thinking through these issues before they take these drastic steps. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're gonna win in these challenges, but they've got good footing to institute these requirements in the first place. So yeah, we'll just have to see how it shakes out. But I agree with the analogy. It makes sense, right? I mean, desperate times call for desperate measures.
Yeah. Okay. Unfortunately, we don't have too much more time. So Angelina, Footsteps Childcare, Mike, some other folks, I think. Oh, Brian. I'm only going to, unfortunately, be able to choose a couple more questions here. So apologies if we're not able to get to all of them. But Brian's asking, if vaccination is a condition of employment, can it also be a condition of hiring?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Oh, so before you bring an individual on, can you say, to get this job, you need to be vaccinated?
Yes.
Okay. That's easy.
Oh, okay.
Next
Okay.
question.
All right. Yeah.
Um,
It can be a condition of becoming employed. It can be a condition of maintaining employment. Yes.
Got it. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Angelina asks, can you terminate an employee if they refuse to get tested for COVID-19?
So generally, yes, it's the same rule that would apply for vaccination. Again, you have to accommodate for any medical or religious exemptions. And I have heard people make claims of exemption as it relates to testing also. That, you know, you're extracting something from my body that goes against my religious beliefs, I'm not going to allow it, or I have a medical condition that I am allergic to shots or whatever it may be. If they can back that up with medical certification, then yeah, you'd have to accommodate. But otherwise, if they don't fall within an exemption, then yes, absolutely, you can make that a condition of employment as well.
Got it. Okay. Well, we're actually blitzing through these questions. I might be able to get through most of them, if not all of them. How do you track weekly testing? Is there a process we have to follow, or can we do our own tracking?
You're going to have to figure out your own tracking system.
Yeah.
But for that reason, you know, I would recommend, you know, you're not going to accept home testing, for instance, which is now available, but you have no idea who took the test or when they took the test. But when you go to a lab, you're going to have a date, you're going to have a receipt, and you're going to have a lab that's analyzed it. So if you're okay with rapid testing, great. Those are going to be a lot quicker, but they're also going to be less effective. If you want PCR testing, it might cost more, it might take longer, but it's going to be more accurate. So in terms of whether you do it, you know, every Tuesday I need you to do this, or, you know, whatever day it is, you'll have to figure out your own tracking system for that.
Got it. And I think you've already touched on this briefly, but what are the repercussions again for employees who refuse to do the weekly testing?
You can discipline them. You can put them on a leave of absence until they go get tested, or you can fire them if they don't play.
Right. Remember, we did also talk about the costs involved that employers are responsible for paying for the testing, giving them leave to get tested, et cetera.
Correct.
So, right, there's that too. And then lastly from Mike, if an unvaccinated employee has an exemption, can we move them to a different job with less potential exposure as part of a reasonable accommodation?
So
and what if that job has lower pay too?
Yeah. So reasonable accommodation can mean a lot of things, and so it could be, yeah, we're going to have you work from home because, you know, you can perform your job from home, and we think that's what's safest. It doesn't have to be the accommodation the employee is looking for, as long as it's reasonable and it doesn't disfavor or negatively impact the employee. So to that point, right, if it's, well, we're going to put you in this other position which is going to pay less, well, that's kind of a problem, because now you are taking adverse action against that employee. The question is, and you're never required to put them in another position. The question is, can they perform this position, the essential functions of this job, with or without an accommodation? It's not a different job with different pay, but you can certainly explore alternatives. It's not just, all right, fine, come in, get tested, we're good. You could say, all right, we're going to put you in this other facility, have you work from there, or we're going to temporarily put you in this position, same pay, same hours. You got to worry about things that might negatively impact the employee. And this one's going to be at a different location. I know you live here, but you're going to have to drive 50 miles to get over there. That would be a problem. You know, a lot of companies are just saying, fine, we'll accommodate you, but in the interest of our general population, that means that we're going to have you work from home.
Got it. Okay. I know there are a lot more questions, folks, and apologies that we don't have more time. I just want to kind of give a really, really, really quick update in terms of what SVCN is doing, just because I can report on that because I am here and doing that. But you know, we're talking to our board right now about, you know, taking that sort of step. You know, we actually have several modules that we've looked at, from everything from the academic system to business associations, et cetera. You know, a lot of big businesses down here in Silicon Valley have taken this same issue on. So we are, you know, looking at a lot of different policies and even drafted like one of our own. I know the county has also created their own kind of policy for their own employees, which I know in a recent call with the county health group, there was a discussion about even possibly sharing that. I'm not sure if that's going to be widely available, but SVCN will share whatever we have to folks if you are interested. So we will be following up with everybody. But, you know, Sarju, thanks again for being here. Thanks to everyone else for being here. Thanks to the SVCN team, Dana, Marissa, Alan, Kira. Thank you all for putting this together. But Sarju, you are such an incredible human being. Thank you for being here and helping us through this really difficult time, boiling it down in a way that we can understand. But I'll leave it to you. Is there any last comments you want to make before we kind of say goodbye to everybody?
No, I thank you all for having me. I appreciate it. I enjoy the topic because I think it's a very important one, and obviously the landscape continues to change. So I feel for you all. I live this stuff every day as well, but I feel for you who are running organizations trying to navigate these difficult issues. So hang in there, stay tough, and good luck to everyone.